Labeled an ugly high school grad and disowned by my family of elite surgeons. I met them again 9 years later at my brother's wedding. My dad sneered, "Why is this defect here?" While my brother mocked that I wasn't invited. His bride rushed over, horrified, shouting, "How dare you? This woman is our health system's majority owner and CEO." I smiled at their pale, trembling faces and said, "You have no idea, do you?" My name is Sarah Harris. To understand how a public humiliation at an elite medical gala in Richmond, Virginia, led to the total financial and professional collapse of my father's surgical empire 9 years later, you have to look inside the toxic, status-obsessed hierarchy of the Harris household. In our family, human worth was never measured by character, kindness, or integrity. It was calculated strictly by medical degrees, surgical publications, and institutional rank. My father, Dr. Franklin Harris, was a nationally celebrated chief of vascular surgery at the prestigious Virginia Health Consortium in Richmond. My mother, Dr. Victoria Harris, was a prominent chief anesthesiologist at the same institution. My older brother, Julian, was the groomed golden child, a tall, handsome, arrogant surgical resident who absorbed our parents' elitism from the moment he could speak. I was born the biological disappointment in an otherwise perfect lineage. During my early teenage years, I suffered from severe hormonal skin conditions, cystic facial scarring, and a late-diagnosed orthopedic spinal curvature that required me to wear a restrictive back brace throughout high school. While Julian was praised as the future star of the medical community, my father routinely referred to me behind closed doors as the genetically defective link in the Harris bloodline. The abuse was not merely verbal, it was systematic and calculated. While my parents poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into private prep schools, elite athletic coaches, and luxury vacations for Julian, I was forced to buy my own secondhand clothes with money I earned tutoring middle school students in advanced mathematics. When I was 16, I realized that I would never fit into my family's narrow definition of success. I had no interest in medicine. Instead, I possessed a fierce, natural talent for advanced computer engineering, neural networks, and mathematical modeling. While my family spent dinner conversations bragging about surgical procedures, I spent my nights in my bedroom teaching myself software programming architectures. The breaking point of my life occurred on the night of my high school graduation. I was 18 years old. Despite living through physical pain, spinal treatments, and relentless emotional neglect, I had graduated at the top of my class and earned a full-ride merit scholarship to study software engineering and artificial intelligence at Carnegie Mellon University. That same evening, my father hosted an extravagant dinner at the Commonwealth Club in downtown Richmond to celebrate Julian's acceptance into a competitive surgical fellowship. Over 50 senior surgeons, hospital board members, and regional health executives were in attendance. Toward the end of the evening, a senior hospital trustee walked over to our table, looked at me sitting quietly in my spinal brace, and politely asked my father about my future plans. My father took a slow sip of his wine, looked at me with open disdain, and let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed across the dining room. "Sarah is our little biological setback," Franklin announced loudly, ensuring every doctor at the surrounding tables could hear him. "She lacks the intellectual horsepower for medicine, and certainly lacks the looks for high society. She's just an ugly high school grad who thinks she's going to write computer code instead of doing real work. She is a defect in our family tree." The room filled with polite, uncomfortable chuckles. Julian smirked, raising his glass in agreement with my father's cruel joke. When we returned home that night, I packed my bags. I confronted my father in the grand foyer, telling him that I was moving to Pittsburgh for college and would never apply to medical school. Franklin's face contorted into an expression of pure, unbridled rage. He grabbed my suitcases, opened the heavy front door, and hurled my luggage out into the pouring rain. "If you walk out that door as an uneducated high school grad, you are no daughter of mine," Franklin screamed, his voice shaking the walls. "I am striking you from my will, stripping you of the Harris name, and disowning you forever. You bring nothing but shame to this family." I picked up my wet bags from the driveway, walked 3 miles to the bus station in the storm, and never looked back. The next 9 years were a masterclass in quiet resilience, strategic focus, and relentless ambition. At Carnegie Mellon, I threw myself entirely into software engineering, biometric data structures, and machine learning. While my peers spent weekends socializing, I spent 20-hour days in the computer research labs developing a groundbreaking predictive software platform called Aegis Neural Diag. The software utilized advanced AI neural networks to analyze real-time patient biometrics, surgical telemetry, and vascular blood flow data, detecting life-threatening surgical complications hours before human eyes could spot them. At 22, I founded Nexus Biohealth Technologies in Boston. Recognizing the revolutionary potential of my platform, top-tier institutional venture funds invested $2 million in seed capital, while I retained 60% founder equity and absolute board voting control. Within 4 years, Nexus Biohealth transformed from a stealth startup into an industry juggernaut. Our diagnostic platform was adopted by over 400 major hospital networks across North America, cutting intraoperative surgical mortality rates by 35%. By the time I turned 29, I was the chief executive officer and principal shareholder of Nexus Biohealth Technologies, a publicly traded medical technology corporation valued at over $4 billion. However, I understood that real institutional leverage required more than software dominance. It required capital control. Through our private venture subsidiary, Nexus Capital Holdings, I began quietly acquiring major equity stakes in regional hospital networks, distressed medical property portfolios, and health system debt notes across the East Coast. In early 2026, Nexus Capital completed the confidential acquisition of a 52% controlling interest in the Virginia Health Consortium, the exact multi-hospital network in Richmond where my father served as chief of vascular surgery and where Julian worked as a junior attending physician. I held the ultimate financial power over their hospital network, their surgical budgets, and their employment contracts. Yet I maintained total corporate anonymity, managing my holdings through our institutional holding structure without ever revealing my personal connection to the Harris family. During those 9 years, my physical health and personal life underwent a complete transformation. Corrective spinal procedures, specialized physical therapy, advanced dermatological care, and 9 years of unshakable confidence erased every physical vulnerability of my youth. I grew into a tall, striking, and formidable woman who commanded respect the moment I entered a room. In July 2026, my brother Julian was set to marry Dr. Eleanor Vance, a brilliant pediatric cardiologist and the daughter of Dr. Richard Vance, the chairman of the board of trustees at the Virginia Health Consortium. The wedding was publicized as the medical social event of the decade, hosted at Dover Hall, an opulent English Tudor estate situated on 50 private acres west of Richmond. I was not invited by my family, who had spent nearly a decade telling people I was dead or forgotten. However, I received a personal, high-priority invitation directly from Dr. Richard Vance and the Board of Trustees. That very weekend, Nexus Biohealth was finalizing a $150 million technology integration and hospital modernization contract with the consortium. As the controlling shareholder and CEO, my presence was explicitly requested at the executive VIP table alongside the bride's family. On a warm Saturday afternoon, I arrived at Dover Hall in a sleek black chauffeured sedan. I wore a tailored floor-length emerald silk dress, understated diamond jewelry, and carried a leather executive portfolio containing the finalized merger contracts. As I walked up the grand stone staircase toward the estate's main entrance, I saw my father, Franklin, and my brother, Julian, standing near the mahogany doors in tailored tuxedos, drinking champagne with several hospital directors. As I approached, Franklin turned his head. He squinted his eyes, failing to recognize the polished, striking billionaire executive walking toward him. But as his eyes focused on my face, a sudden flash of recognition crossed his features, immediately replaced with deep, accustomed disgust. Julian stepped forward, blocking the entrance with an arrogant sneer. "Why is this defect here?" Franklin spat, his voice booming across the terrace and catching the attention of nearby guests. How did an uneducated, ugly high school grad manage to sneak past security at an exclusive private estate? Julian crossed his arms, looking down at me with condescending contempt. "You've got some nerve showing your face here, Sarah. You were disowned 9 years ago because you were an embarrassment to a family of real doctors. You are not invited, you are not welcome, and you need to leave before I have security drag you off the property." I did not step back. I stood at my full height, looking at my father and brother with cool, detached, amused pity. "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully, Julian," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and carrying an unmistakable edge of authority.
Franklin stepped down the stairs, his face flushing red with anger. "Don't you dare speak to my son with that tone. You are a pathetic, uneducated nobody who ruined our family legacy. You are nothing." Before Franklin could finish his tirade, the heavy mahogany entrance doors swung open. The bride, Dr. Eleanor Vance, stepped out onto the veranda in her bridal gown, accompanied by her father, Dr. Richard Vance, the chairman of the Board of Trustees. Eleanor saw me standing on the steps, and her jaw dropped in utter astonishment. She immediately moved past Julian and hurried down the stone stairs. "Miss Harris!" Eleanor exclaimed, her voice filled with immense professional deference. "We are so honored you could attend. My father and I were just looking for you." Franklin stared at Eleanor in total bewilderment. "Eleanor, dear, do you know this girl?" "She's my estranged daughter, an uneducated high school dropout who tried to crash your wedding." Eleanor spun around, her eyes flashing with fierce indignation as she glared at Franklin and Julian. "How dare you?" Eleanor declared, her voice echoing across the courtyard so clearly that dozens of high society guests froze in place. "How dare you speak to her like that? This woman is Sarah Harris, the founder, chief executive officer, and majority owner of Nexus Biohealth Technologies." Julian's face drained of every drop of color. What? What did you say?" Dr. Richard Vance stepped forward, his tone icy and authoritative as he addressed my father. "Dr. Harris, Miss Harris's firm acquired a 52% controlling interest in the Virginia Health Consortium 2 months ago. She literally owns our hospital network, sits above the Board of Trustees, and personally controls your surgical department's budget." Franklin gasped, clutching his chest as his knees buckled slightly against the stone balustrade. He stared at me in sheer, paralyzing horror, realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. I stepped forward, looking down at my father and brother with a calm, victorious smile. "You had no idea, did you?" I said softly into the silent courtyard. The institutional consequences were swift, absolute, and devastating. During the wedding reception, Dr. Richard Vance convened an emergency executive session in Dover Hall's private library. Having witnessed Franklin and Julian's appalling, unprovoked verbal assault on the health system's primary owner and investor, the board immediately reviewed ongoing internal compliance audits regarding Franklin's surgical division. The audit, which I had ordered weeks prior as part of standard corporate due diligence, revealed that Franklin had been systematically manipulating surgical outcome data to maintain his department's performance bonuses, while Julian had accrued multiple patient care citations that Franklin had quietly suppressed. By Monday morning, the Board of Trustees voted unanimously to strip Franklin Harris of his Chief of Surgery title, revoke his clinical privileges, and terminate his contract with the Virginia Health Consortium. Julian's surgical fellowship was permanently canceled, and his misconduct was reported to the state medical board, blacklisting him from major hospital systems across the region. Stripped of their positions, facing massive public embarrassment, and ruined within the medical community, my father and brother watched their decades of arrogant elitism collapse into complete dust. Today, Nexus Biohealth continues to expand its reach, revolutionizing patient care and saving lives across the globe. I live a life of complete freedom, profound purpose, and unshakable financial power, surrounded by people who value true excellence over superficial titles. Looking back at that night, when my father threw me out into the rain and called me a defect, I realized it was the moment I found my real strength. I proved that true dignity is built through resilience, and no arrogant family legacy can ever diminish a spirit determined to build its own kingdom.
Educational lesson. This narrative illustrates critical legal mechanisms regarding institutional equity acquisitions, healthcare corporate governance, and fiduciary compliance auditing. Majority equity control in healthcare systems, private healthcare networks, and hospital consortiums often operate under corporate holding structures. Acquiring a controlling equity stake over 50% grants the parent holding entity absolute governance rights over the board of trustees, institutional budgets, executive appointments, and clinical contract renewals. Fiduciary due diligence and compliance auditing. When an institutional investor acquires a healthcare network, mandatory forensic audits are conducted across all surgical and clinical divisions. Misrepresentation of patient outcome metrics, fraudulent bonus claims, or concealed clinical citations constitute severe breaches of contract that justify immediate termination of surgical chiefs without severance or liability protection. Corporate retaliation safeguards in board oversight.
Medical directors and attending physicians serve at the discretion of the governing board and equity owners. Professional misconduct, public defamation, or reputational endangerment committed against institutional owners provides immediate legal cause for credential revocation, contract cancellation, and state medical board reporting. Personal advice. If you have been disowned, mocked, or labeled as inferior by family members who measure human worth through rigid social status or specific career paths, do not allow their narrow worldview to define your potential. True self-worth is not derived from inheriting someone else's approval or matching their expectations. Focus on developing your unique talents, cultivate unyielding self-discipline, and build an independent life grounded in competence and integrity. When faced with arrogant elitism, do not waste energy in petty arguments. Let your achievements, financial independence, and personal character speak for you.